Hey everybody, welcome back to this episode of Think Business Exclusives. Looking forward to talking with Dave McNulty. Dave, it's great to see you. You are Vice President, Global Human Resources, and I'm looking forward. I love talking about HR. It's one of my favorite topics to talk about for many, many reasons. I'm looking forward to kind of taking a deep dive with you. Think Community, as you know, I'm a business coach, and one of my missions is to I work with successful people and I get them unstuck. And the beautiful part about my podcast that I love is it gives the listener a minimum of one idea or tip to get them unstuck. And so, Dave, you lead HR for Lear's two businesses, Seeding and E-Systems and Corporate, in addition to talent acquisition, and responsible for HR teams globally across the Americas, Asia, Europe, and Africa. I want to dive in to talent acquisition because I think that is something that is one of the that as a business coach, whether I'm working with a solopreneur or a fortune company, talent acquisition is one of the hardest things right now. And so can you talk a little bit about, what your process and how you're going about finding great
talent?
Yeah,
absolutely. So I joined Lear in 2013. I came from a background of working mainly on the talent acquisition side in places like Honeywell, PepsiCo, Merrill Lynch, and earlier in my career, and Smith Barney. So I spent a lot of time working in big companies and mainly on the talent acquisition side. So it was kind of a good entryway to move to Lear to head up TA. One of the things that I was kind of first focusing on when we got here was moving away from the model of when you have an opening, off you go, call a search firm, spend 30-40% of the base salary and other costs for somebody that might be of uncertain kind of benefit. So what we focused on was building our own internal team. This was early on. LinkedIn existed, but this was early on in the days where people started to use LinkedIn as kind of a primary channel to find candidates. Yeah. So what we did was we found people, some of whom had worked in search and some of whom were HR pros that had other experience, and we built our own in-house recruiting team. What that meant was that in probably 85-90% of the cases, we did our own recruiting, used LinkedIn, used our best recruiters, which aren't our TA team, but they're our employees. We're now at the point where we have probably 35% of our hires coming from internal referrals. So it's great to have people coming in through search firms, accept the cost because it can be faster. Right. But when we do our own recruiting, it's fine. But what I've tried to do over the last 8 or 9 years is find people, especially at the VP level, that are around and available, that have the right skills that we need, that I can find through LinkedIn. And I was just talking about this yesterday because we're having a board of directors presentation quite soon. And one of the things we want to talk about is talent. What I do is I stay connected with our leaders of that I bring in. And I ask them pretty much 3 questions after they've been here a few months. How's it going? Who do you know? So I can steal their address book and get the best people that they know that they think, having been here a few months, that will fit with the culture. And then the last question I ask them is, what do you need? Mm-hmm. So we keep that connection. The answers are usually the same. It's going great. Yes, I know 1 or 2 people, and then they always forget. Then I have to bug them again, and I will eventually get the names. And the last thing is they usually come back after a couple of months to say, okay, what else do I need to do to grow? And then that's when we start focusing on their development, because hiring somebody in and not focusing on kind of how you can make them grow means that they're not really going to get to the way you want them to be. You're bringing them in because of their potential, not just because what they've done. So our focus is on getting to do that. Yeah. So that's kind of what we focused on, is kind of internal referrals, having an executive recruiting team that can go out and find people without using search firms. And then we assess the talent, which I'll talk about in a minute. But we've saved, I think this year, the cost avoidance by not using search is around about $6 million.
Wow.
So it's pretty meaningful. And we don't just do that in the US, we do that in everywhere else around the world too.
Wow. I love that. I want to talk a little bit about investing in your people because I love when I hear people and companies talk about that. I think a lot of times people are not investing in their people to the extent that they should. You know, they're hiring because they're in a panic. Recruiting is not part of their day to day, and so they fill a seat, and then they're not really thinking about investing in that person because they weren't able to take the time to find someone who has even more potential. They're just filling a seat. And so can you kind of talk about a little bit about, you know, what you look for as far as the type of person that, you know, where that kind of gap in potential is that maybe the person you're hiring doesn't see, or, you know, and then how investing in them can bring out even more potential on an ongoing basis?
Yeah, one thing that we always find is that the easiest thing to do once you have an opening, somebody leaves or somebody transfers or whatever, is, okay, well, let's go outside. And I think going outside to get people with fresh thinking and new ideas is great. But what you also need to do is you need to blend that with the people that you currently have within the company to make sure that what you never want to happen is for people to say, okay, the way to get on and the way to make more money and the way to grow is to leave and go somewhere else. And then you're left with even more turnover. So what we try and focus on is giving people the skills that they need and giving them development on a kind of an ongoing basis. We have a bunch of different programs that we have for development, whether it's in business specific skills, whether it's finance, HR, IT, or whatever, or more generally in terms of their own personal development. And we use a number of different tools and approaches to get that done. But what we find is that if you leave people just to sit there and wait, what will happen is that they will find their own way of getting developed, and they'll find their own way of leaving to go get it.
Yeah.
So what we really do is we don't do an annual review. By the time you get to an annual review, the chances of you kind of having constant connections with the employees to find out kind of what their development needs are, it's too late. You've wasted a year. So we've moved to something that we call talking points. So the formal process where you sit down and you're given an A or a B or whatever kind of meets expectations, it's kind of old-fashioned. We were pretty much the first firm to do that. So what we do now is we have a series of coaching conversations where the expectation is you do 4, but we can live with a minimum of 3 conversations a year, roughly once a quarter, where you come in, sit down with me, tell me what you're working on, and I'll tell you what I think is going well, tell you what I think you could be doing better at, and let's talk about what you need in terms of development. And then we have an in-house suite of different programs that can provide that development. But if you leave it till a year later, it's too late. And if you leave it so that you're not driving this conversation, the employee needs to drive it themselves, but it needs to be a genuine partnership to focus on what they need to develop.
Yeah. I love that. And I always find, Dave, that everybody wants to know how they're doing, and the once a year, it just doesn't really work. And I would think that leads to those meetings, those connections lead to the 35% of internal referrals. Yeah.
One thing that's interesting that we find is that we did a survey last year of people that left, and this is obviously a challenging time with COVID, and there's huge demands on people, and so turnover is higher generally across the industry and across the region. We've managed to keep our turnover down, but we still lose some people. The one thing that we found in common for the people that left, we picked the director level as just a kind of let's pick a band and see what we learn. We asked them how many coaching conversations have they had with their manager, and the number with the people that were leaving was consistently lower than what it should have been. Mm-hmm. So what it meant was you don't spend time with your people are going to start thinking and start looking elsewhere.
Yeah. I'm a big believer people leave managers, not companies.
Yeah. I mean, it's 2 things. People don't really leave for money. They usually get more money on the way out, but people leave for 2 reasons. One, because they don't have a great boss, or the second one is that they're not being given the opportunity to grow.
Yeah, I agree. Wow, I love it. Let's talk a little bit about building ambassadors, because it sounds like that's something that Lear does really, really well. building ambassadors, 35% internal referrals is really high. And so how are you, I mean, you've laid the foundation of a lot of things that you're doing, but just kind of, bridge that to how that affects the culture, which is, bringing internal referrals in the door.
It starts with building a sense of pride in the company. This company's been around for 100 years, and we've had our ups and downs. Bankruptcy, 15 years ago, and then risen like a phoenix from that over the last 15 years, and obviously challenges after that. But we've built a culture, and the current head of HR, Tom DiDonato, has been here for the last 10 years. He's focused really like a laser on two things: talent and culture. You find the right talent, you build the right culture, people will stay. So what's happened is that with that focus, there's a sense of pride. It's kind of one of those things that you walk into a room and you see someone from Lear. We've gone from, I describe it as, especially joining post-bankruptcy in automotive, where people were kind of somewhat skeptical, sort of 10 or 15 years ago. People go from dubious to curious to interested. It's kind of getting them on that journey. Yeah. So you bring the right people in, you give them the right development, and then you go back to them on a regular basis to say, who do you know that's like you, that has your sense of entrepreneurship and that sense of enthusiasm and has the skills? Let us know. And we pay a referral bonus, but of a few $1,000 to people below kind of a certain level. And then for directors and VPs, we allow them to make a charitable contribution that we pay for, so that it's not just about kind of them making money to bring people in. But you find that the more people have a connection with the company, the more they want to bring people in. They want to bring family members in, and they want to bring friends. So the other issue you have to deal with that is that a constant priority for us is making sure we have a diverse workforce, especially in a place like Detroit, where there's a diverse workforce out there. So we want to make sure that we go out and find the best talent at all levels, from all types of backgrounds, and then make sure that when we bring in females and minorities in particular, that we encourage them to give us referrals more than anybody, so we can make sure that we have a genuinely diverse staff.
I love it. You're talking about the connection that Lear has with his people. I want to rewind a little bit to, pre-1997 and your connection of what drew you to this career, this field, this, executive recruitment and talent acquisition and HR. I'm a big believer success is not a straight line. And, and I think right now, many people are trying to kind of find that fulfillment and, something that comes intuitively to them that they can make a career and monetize. So kind of take me back and how you knew this was kind of the career path you wanted to be on, because you've done it incredibly successfully. You've done it for a long time. So you obviously made the right choice. So now take me back to the beginning.
Yeah, I think I can attribute it to two things. One, having the right bosses who allowed me the opportunity to do things I really wasn't qualified to do early on. And the second is identifying what I really was good at and what I really liked to do. So in my career, I've had three bosses that one hired me many years ago in the UK, and then hired me into another company after she left. Another one, I was working for Merrill Lynch in London. He gave me the opportunity to move to the US to work for the same company there at Merrill Lynch. Then finally, Tom, the CHRO that I work for now, he and I worked together for most of the last 27 years at PepsiCo, and then Merck Medco, and then American Eagle Outfitters, and then finally for the last 9-10 years at Lear. Having bosses that believe in you and that give you honest and direct feedback so that you can improve means that you can learn much faster, and you can course correct rather than just kind of go along doing what you're doing. The second thing is deciding and kind of thinking long and hard about what I was good at. A lot of recruiters are transactionally focused. They're asked to go find someone, they find someone, they move on. One thing I always found was that for every one person I hire, I meet 2 or 3 other people that could be good for a different role, could be good for a different department, or they could be good to refer other people. So I've always done a good job, because I'm a kind of a very social person, of connecting with people, staying in touch with people, so that when it comes to 6 months or 2 years later, when I get the call to say, do you know someone who might be good at this? I can call them, or more often to see if they know somebody, but more often it could actually be that person that could be right. But it's a matter of staying in touch and connecting with people, and realizing that I could connect with people at that level meant that was kind of the focus that I started on the TA side, and then learning how to do executive search, which is kind of a different skill where you're dealing with people at the top of the house. Learning about there's kind of two things: making sure that you've got the right bar for talent so that you can identify talent. The second thing is momentum. The biggest way to make sure that you don't do well is to operate at a steady pace, rather than being able to hustle to make sure that you can get the right person in front of the right people within the company quickly, and then determining who the right people are, so that I've got this great candidate, but they have a different background. Well, let's have them meet people with a similar background to them when they come in. So it's not just coming in an interview with 5 people who say, okay, tell me about yourself. Tell me what you've done well. Tell me what you've struggled at. Tell me your weaknesses and other nonsensical questions. Finding people that can actually have a conversation with people and build that connection. It's all about building that relationship.
Yeah, I love what I want to talk about relationship building for another minute or so, because you said something to me that resonated very deeply, which is you had great bosses, you had people that believed in you, you had people who saw your potential. Just going back to what how we started our conversation. I mean, you had someone who saw your potential, and it reminds me a little bit of I don't know if you ever watched The Men That Built America. But, Carnegie was from the age of 12 working with Tom Scott in the railroad business. And, he was a mentor to him. And so that's what I really want to talk to you about is mentorship. A lot of people don't have it. A lot of people need it. I think the Gen Z generation and the millennial generation are craving it more than the older seasoned generations. Yeah. So can you just talk about why people need mentors and really what a mentor is? And I just want to say this too, because I've had mentors that I thought were mentors, but really they had their own agenda. And a true mentor is someone like you're talking about who really brings out your potential and wants the best for you, I have found. And so
I 100% agree.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about finding the right mentor and listening to your intuition that it's not somebody who just wants you to do something for them.
Yeah. One thing that we've avoided at Lear and most other places I've worked at is the first instinct is usually let's develop a mentor program. Let's have 30 high potential people. Let's give them all a mentor and let's put them together and see what happens. The one thing that we found is that we can support mentor-mentee relationships, but really what happens is people find their own mentors. That's the biggest kind of revelation to us is that if you allow people the chance to find their own mentors and then see how the relationship develops, it goes a lot better than assigning people, because what tends to happen is then you have a monthly conversation, you sit down and kind of you're both watching the clock, and then you get out of there, and then 20% of them maybe work because the people have a genuine connection. But having somebody that's invested in you is something that you can't assign. It has to kind of happen naturally. So what we try and do is we encourage people in different situations to connect with leaders. Then if they develop a connection in a relationship, that's great. Yeah. We have a program for 31, it's a pilot program, 31 high potential women and minorities at Lear called Together We Grow, which we've kind of talked about it publicly, where we have their managers part of the program, and we have people that kind of partner with them. And you could call them mentors, but we look at it more as much of a coaching thing as anything else. But they have regular kind of catch-ups, and what tends to happen is that the more you give people the tools and the more you actually encourage them to kind of work together, it works. But in the end, people kind of get to a point where they find someone that is either in their department or quite often outside the department from a kind of different background, but that has a genuine curiosity. Yeah. So our hope is that we can find people that A, have the drive to go out and find someone to act as their mentor, and then B, can find someone that they can connect with, because it's all about that connection. And the person has to have a couple of things. They have to be direct and honest, and then secondly, they have to be curious. So tell me what's going on with you. Why do you think that's happening? How else do you think you could have handled that? What else? What other approaches do you think you could take, rather than this is what I think you should do? You don't want kind of this kind of directive approach. It's much more kind of having a curiosity about them, and like, why do you want that? Why do you want to talk to your manager and ask about this and that? And so they have someone that they can bounce ideas off, I think, is more important than giving people direct feedback.
Yeah, I agree. They need to be more interested versus just interesting, telling, the how-tos.
Yeah.
Let's talk about HR for a second. And, one of the things I see, Dave, I've seen this, I think, my whole career. I see it kind of under a microscope as a business coach. The difficulty people have for asking for help, for, walking in that HR door and asking for help. And so can you talk about that a little bit, and how you encourage people to reach out and ask, and what that process should look and feel like?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think the days of people kind of thinking that HR is the place to go to if you need help is hopefully gone, in the fact that HR is just one place that they can go to. That's why you have your own manager. That's why you have a network of people that you work with, that you have the connection with, and people on the outside. I think that the most important thing is just having openness. That if you have HR people that, again, are curious, going back to having an interest and being open and approaching, what we're trying to do is we're trying to look at HR slightly differently than we've done in the past, in that we're looking at moving away a lot of our processes for compensation and benefits and a lot of the administrative and technical parts of HR into shared service groups. Into I'm actually sitting in the office I've just borrowed today for somebody who works in a shared service department. So outsourcing a lot of the process work, which means that it leaves the HR group to focus more on working with our employees and working with the teams on a much more kind of direct basis, not focusing on kind of day-to-day, putting that in a group that can be handled kind of, it's more efficient to do that when you've got a small group that can handle process after process after process.
Yeah.
And much more where you have the employees working together with HR without necessarily having to focus on the transactions.
Yeah.
So that frees them up so that they can focus more on building those connections.
It's interesting. One of the things, just going back to the data you brought, the people that left had less interactions with their managers. I find that when I talk to people who go to HR and skip over their manager, it's because they don't have enough meetings with their manager.
Yeah. And
so they don't have that, like you said earlier, they don't have the connection with their manager. So they feel like they have no choice but to only go to HR.
Yeah.
So,
it's interesting. One thing we also do as well, John, is we piloted something, I think 4 or 5 years ago now. We were the first ones to do it. It's called a leadership report card. And what happens is that for our vice presidents we started with, and then our directors and now managers, you get sent a survey that asks questions about the person that's getting the report card, 6 peers and together with 6 direct reports. So I got mine probably a month ago, and we all sit there in May. It's kind of waiting for the report card from school, thinking, okay, this has got to go home to my parents. So you get your report card and it asks questions, and then we put it together, and then we give you a grade. So you get an A minus, B plus, all the way down to a C. And the goal isn't that we're going to promote the A's and fire the C's, because it's more for the employee. It's not for the manager. So the goal is for the employee to take the report card to the manager to say, look, this is what I learned. This is what I'm finding. This is what people are saying to me, because you have the chance to make comments too in the report card. But it really makes a difference. And the one thing that we found is that if I have somebody coming to me to say, okay, how can I improve my score? We can sit down with them and we can coach them to say, well, they're saying that you need to focus on this or focus less on that. But the one thing that's constant is, if you want to improve your score from your direct reports, improve the number and the quality of your coaching conversations with your people. Because that is almost without fail the reason why the scores are lower than they should be. Because they're not spending the time with their employees. Employees crave feedback.
Yeah.
They crave it. They don't always like what they get, but they crave it. And if you don't focus on giving them the feedback, you're going to hear about it and you're going to see about it in your reports.
Yeah.
And people say it's it's the kind of a Gen Z thing and it's a Gen X thing, and they want more feedback. I don't think that's true. The ancient Greeks used to complain about the youth of today, right? So I really don't think anything to do with their age. The difference with kind of the new generations is that they have better information than we did, and they're better connected.
Yeah.
They have the internet as a tool to learn, and they also have everything from LinkedIn to Instagram to you name it, technologies that my kids know and I don't.
Yeah.
So they're just better informed. And one thing that they want to be is better informed about themselves, and they want that feedback. And if you don't give it to them, you'll hear about it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I just want to highlight one thing that I love that you use the word feedback. So do I. I hear too many people use the word constructive criticism, and I always think it's just the word feedback is so much nicer to tee things up. I have one last question before I do a quick speed round with you, Dave.
Yeah.
You've mentioned a lot, we're the first to do this, we were the first to do this, et cetera. What does innovation mean to Lear?
I think it's the core to what we do. We have a CEO, Ray Scott, who's been at this company for 34 years, and the reason he got to that level and the reason he's succeeded is because you can basically say a seat is a seat is a seat, and so what difference does it make? Unless you innovate to find the solutions for our products that don't do what what our other competitors are doing, you end up dealing with a commodity. So innovation, and not just in our products, but also in the way that we look at our business, the way that we work with our customers, means that we have to be focused on being an innovative company ourselves and making sure that we can find people that can think about not just what we need to do for our customers today, but what does that mean for Industry 4.0? What does that mean for how our plants are going to look? Do we need the same type of technology? Almost certainly no. You need to continue to evolve. But do we need the same type of people? And the answer is usually not either. You need to focus on bringing in people with that kind of innovation mindset going forward.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. All right, quick speed round. You ready, Dave?
Sure.
A book that's had the biggest impact on you.
God, I read so much that which one would I say more than any other? Probably I'm assuming you're going to edit this down because I just spent 15 minutes of gap there. I think the books probably had the most influence on me are the Robert Caro books, Master of the Senate about Lyndon Johnson. Just the level of detail and learning about the process of politics, how politics worked, and how he rose. I just think it's probably the most interesting book I've ever read, and it's a lesson in kind of how somebody can work in many different structures and many different ways.
All right, I haven't read that. I'm going to read it. Best piece of wisdom you've ever received?
Tell the truth.
Yeah.
It's easy when you're in HR to say, okay, well, how do we say this? How do we tell someone they're not right for a role? Or how do we tell somebody in power that we don't agree with their approach? And you can think of a million different ways to kind of put it together, but in the end, tell the truth. Yeah. People actually value the truth.
I'll tell you a quick story. I've done almost 1,400 interviews. And one of my very first interviews on Think Business was I emailed Howard Behar, who was a former president of Starbucks. And he agreed to be on my show. He was my first guest. And he wrote a book called It's Not About the Coffee, or It's Not Just About the Coffee. I can't think off the top of my head. So I asked him, what was the most impactful part of the book? He had to lay people off, and he accidentally left the list. I think it was on the copy machine, but somebody got a hold of it. And so they had to have this emergency meeting on a weekend. I maybe, some of it maybe not completely, but they have an emergency weekend, and they were trying to figure out how to spin it and what to tell people. And the secretary said, why don't you just tell them the truth? So that's what he did. He got up there, in front of, thousands of people, and he told them the truth, and everybody was like, "Okay, we got your back now."
We've been there. We've all done it.
Correct.
We've all made mistakes. You learn and you move on.
Yeah, it's a great book. Finish the sentence. Last question. One thing every person can do to be more connected to their people is.
Listen.
Yeah, I love it. Dave, I appreciate your time. I love what I do as a business coach, and I love doing this podcast because I'm all about getting people unstuck. And when I interview people, especially in the HR world, who are so connected to the soul of the entire company, I love it because, if there's a theme here to get people unstuck, is Think Community is a question to ask yourself, in my opinion, how connected are you to, and then fill in the blank. Because if you're not, then on the commodity scale, you are viewed probably more as a commodity. And
Yeah.
people in recruiting today, recruiting, retaining, training is so difficult if you are not connected. And you brought up a lot of highlights. People, don't leave for money if they're not connected. Why people leave because they're not connected to their bosses. I appreciate all of the things that you shared today. I think it will help a ton of people continually get unstuck. And thank you, Think Community. Thank you for listening. Dave, any last words? Any last thoughts?
No, thanks. I couldn't thank you more for allowing me to do this. I love being part of something like this, because anything that can help people be a better leader, I'm more than happy to be part of.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And tell people if they want to connect with you, or if they're maybe looking for a job, or however that may be, how can they connect with you, Dave?
Dave McNulty at LinkedIn.com. You can find me there. Connect me.
Good.
I'll respond to anybody.
Awesome. Dave, I appreciate it. Think Community, thank you so much. Dave, a pleasure meeting you a couple weeks ago, and a pleasure getting to know you today. Thanks so much.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.